The Empire of the Summer Moon is a 2010 nonfiction book by S.C. Gwynne that tells the story of the Comanche people and their leader, Quanah Parker, during the 19th century, when they were the most powerful Indian tribe in the history of America. The book begins with an epilogue set in the early 1870s that introduces Quanah Parker and describes his childhood growing up as the son of a white American captive and a Comanche chief. This is how he grew up, speaking both English and two Native American languages and learning about two different cultures. So after spending his youth living among the Comanches, learning to be a warrior, and mastering horseback riding skills, he will play a crucial role in resisting the U.S. Army's attempts to force his people onto reservations. And he'll lead them in battle against the Kiowas, Apaches, Utes, Cheyennes, Crows, and many others until the very end. But before we go into details, let me remind you to subscribe if you haven't yet so that you won't miss any new videos. Now let's get started. In the mid-1800s, the Comanches were at the height of their power, controlling more territory than any other Native American tribe, having an effective fighting force of some 25,000 warriors, and being wealthier than all but a few of the richest landowners in the United States. Their empire stretched from the Rio Grande to the Washita River and included parts of present-day Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, and New Mexico. But it's important to note that the Comanches didn't view themselves as an empire, but simply as a loose collection of bands and villages that shared a common language and culture and who came together periodically to fight the enemy. Also, there was no such thing as a Comanche nation or country. Instead, each village was autonomous and however, even though there was no central authority, they were able to maintain a sense of unity and independence through their use of sign language and runners who could travel quickly between villages. And this helped them respond quickly to attacks by other tribes or by the U.S. Army. In fact, this was one of the main reasons why they were able to resist the U.S. Army for so long. Now, while the Comanches were not technically an empire, they did have an emperor. He was called the paramount chief, and he was elected by the tribal leaders whenever there was a need for a war leader. And when Quanah Parker grew up, he became the paramount chief and would lead the Comanches in many battles against the U.S. Army and other tribes. So basically, the Comanche social structure was made up of several semi-autonomous bands and villages, each of which was led by a chief and a council of elders. Each band or village had its own territory, but the overall boundaries of Common Korea were defined by the paramount chief. Every spring, the paramount chief would call a meeting of all the chiefs in order to discuss issues that affected the whole empire. At these meetings, decisions were made about everything from war and peace to trade and diplomacy. So basically, it was like a parliament where everyone had a voice. And because the Comanches valued freedom and democracy, they were actually centuries ahead of the rest of the world. But what really made the Comanches so formidable was their military strength. They were perhaps the greatest horsemen in the history of the world. They were fierce and disciplined fighters who used bows and arrows and guns with deadly accuracy. Plus, they were known for their ability to ride horses at full speed for days without stopping. And they were also excellent trackers and hunters. So basically, they were like the Spartans of the Native Americans. Another reason for their military success was their use of the horse. When the Spanish introduced horses to the Americas in the 1500s, the Comanches quickly mastered horsemanship and used horses for everything from transportation to warfare. By the time the U.S. Army arrived on the scene, the Comanches were already expert riders who knew how to use horses to their advantage. So the U.S. Army stood absolutely no chance against them. Also, another thing that helped the Comanches resist the U.S. Army for so long was their knowledge of the land. The Comanches lived in the Great Plains, a vast, open landscape that seemed to have few natural barriers. But the Comanches knew how to use the terrain to their advantage. They would often ambush the U.S. Army on the open range, then disappear into the tall grass as quickly as they appeared. And because the U.S. Army was slow to adapt to these tactics, they suffered heavy casualties. In fact, for decades, the U.S. Army was unable to defeat the Comanches in battle. It wasn't until the late 1860s that the U.S. Army began to win some victories against the Comanches, and it was until 1875 that the Comanches were finally forced to sign a treaty that ended their resistance. But by that time, their power and way of life had been broken. So now let's talk about how the Comanches became so rich. The Comanches were wealthy due to their success in raiding other tribes and settlements. They were known for their ability to strike quickly and accurately with bows and arrows and guns, and they would often target isolated settlements or travelers who were easy prey. They also raided other tribes for captives to sell into slavery, and because they controlled much of the southern plains, the Comanches were able to collect tribute from the tribes that lived there. In addition, the Comanches were skilled hunters, and they used their knowledge of the land to trap animals and harvest their hides, which they could then sell to traders for goods such as blankets, ammunition, and food. And finally, the Comanches were also farmers, and they grew crops such as corn, beans, and squash. While agriculture was not the basis of their economy, Farming provided them with a reliable source of food and other goods that they needed to survive. So all these factors combined to make the Comanches one of the wealthiest tribes in the United States. and at the height of their power, some estimates suggest that the average Comanche had more wealth than the average European peasant. However, despite their wealth and power, the Comanches were eventually defeated by the U.S. Army. There are a number of reasons for this defeat. One reason was that the U.S. Army was better equipped and armed with advanced weapons such as rifles and artillery. Another reason was that the U.S. Army was better organized and had a more effective fighting force. Additionally, the U.S. Army was able to use the element of surprise to their advantage, often catching the Comanches off guard and attacking them when they were vulnerable. Finally, the U.S. Army was able to exploit internal divisions within the Comanche Empire, using diplomacy and divide-and-conquer tactics to weaken their resistance. As a result, the Comanches were eventually forced to sign a treaty that ended their resistance and forced them to move to reservations. And here's where our story of Quanah Parker comes in. He was born in 1846 to Cynthia Ann Parker, a white American captive of the Comanches, and Pita Hato, a Comanche chief. So growing up, he learned 2 languages, English and 2 Native American languages, and he learned about 2 different cultures. This gave him a unique perspective on the world and helped him to become a great leader. After spending his youth living among the Comanches, learning to be a warrior and mastering horseback riding skills, he would play a crucial role in resisting the U.S. Army's attempts to force his people onto reservations, and he'll lead them in battle against the Kiowas, Apaches, Utes, Cheyennes, Crows, and many others until the very end. Now, I could go on and tell you more about his life and the lives of his people, but this video is already getting pretty long, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up here. If you want to learn more about the Comanches and their history, I highly recommend checking out the book Empire of the Summer Moon. It's a really well-written book, and it's full of fascinating information. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe so that you don't miss any new videos. And if you have a favorite character from this video, share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.